here I am with the one and only David Malmo Levine. David is the author of Vamsterdam Comics. Do you want to say a bit about Vamsterdam Comics?
Sure. It's 420 pages in underground cartoon, full color style that tells the secret history of the drug war. About 16 different pot activists that helped to get drug peace to where we are at today, 2022. It tells the story of my argument to the Supreme Court of Canada, self-represented on pot dealing charges. It has over 100 pages on CIA, drug trafficking, and it's designed to save the world in 3 different ways to help remove the red tape around industrial hemp so that it can replace fossil fuels, and that would end the greenhouse effect, reverse the greenhouse effect, because hemp ethanol is a carbon
It's much
negative.
more efficient than corn ethanol, eh?
16 times more efficient, according to my research.
Yeah.
And then this would also help end scapegoating and protect harmless people from harm, and remove that as a device of population control by the evil empires of the world. And it would also spread the economies of fuel and energy to millions of farmers and gardeners instead of a handful of corporate weasels. So it's designed to save the world in 3 different ways, and that's kind of why I'm here on this planet, to help human evolution and
and
spread the power around.
Awesome, yeah, and it's an honor to meet you, David, because I am aware of your activism, and I think that a lot of people don't know the history of the drug war, and they think that legalization was, I don't know, a gift by benevolent government, and obviously that's not at all true.
No.
If you know the real history. So yeah, do you want to tell the story of how weed became legal in Canada?
Sure, yeah. It's not legal really unless you're rich or old. The young and the poor have been left out of legalization, so but
To smoke, it's legal to use.
yeah, but if you're
Which
under
is
18, then you're under 19, then you're fucked. If your landlord doesn't like you smoking pot, then you're fucked. If you happen to want to grow it, but you don't have your landlord's permission, then you're fucked. If you want to sell it,
So there's
but
a long way to go, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
so-
cartelization. It's designed for the rich.
Yeah, I think we do need to kind of celebrate our successes, though. People aren't going to jail for fucking ounces of weed, and before there were certainly people who were being homeless people, for instance, that were getting booked for.
That's not entirely true. People are still going to jail for ounces of weed if they're trying to sell dime bags. And the first guy to get busted under legalization for sales.
We got a lot of ground to cover, so we need to cover the history of the drug war. Okay?
Sure. Okay.
So how did you get involved in cannabis culture?
All right. So first off, I went to Holland when I was 19 years old, and I saw like pot cafes. I bought pot at a cafe. I smoked it on a table outside a cafe, and I watched people walking around not giving a shit, and I was like, hey, this is so civilized, so orderly.
Yeah.
I mean, you have open drug sales, but you don't have all the things they said that would happen as a result of open drug sales. People are productive.
Yeah.
They have a toke after work, and they get on with life.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? Canada could have that much freedom too.
Yeah. So the example inspired you.
The example inspired me, and then in 92, a couple of years after I went to Holland, in 92, I came across a copy of The Emperor Wears No Clothes.
Jack Herer.
And I was like, what? Hemp can replace all these things? Anything
You
that
know who it was for me? It was Jello by Afra.
that
opened
too.
my mind.
Yeah, grow more pot, right?
Yeah.
But I came across Emperor a year before I listened to I Blow Minds for a Living.
Yeah.
And then it all came at around the same time. So in 92, I started writing about it for the Gateway student newspaper at the University of Alberta. And in 93, I started organizing smoke-ins and demonstrations and protests in Edmonton.
Okay. So you were the first in, were you the first?
What, in Edmonton?
In Edmonton.
No, in the 70s they were doing smoke-ins in Edmonton. But I was really the first of the second wave of pot activists in the 90s to start organizing civil disobedience there.
Okay.
And so I did that for 2 years in Edmonton, and then Mark Emery noticed what I was doing, and he said, hey, how would you like to do that but in Vancouver and with a budget? And I
Okay.
was like, yeah. So it got
Nice.
sponsored. I was like
Nice,
a
that's
pro
awesome.
skater, except instead of a skateboard, I was smoking pot.
Okay, well, what was Mark Emery back? Because Mark Emery was a hero of mine back in the day. What was, what was like meeting him like back in the day? What was he like that?
Before he got involved in far right
Mhm.
politics
Yeah,
and
yeah.
became kind of a scapegoater,
Uh-huh.
Mark was cool. He was saying things that were I totally agreed with, and he was down with hemp, and he was he didn't provide.
So is his role overstated in the like history of the movement, or was he really, 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 really important in the whole kind of?
He was important because he brought the commerce to the drug
Yeah.
peace activist community. Like, none of us were business people, and he was great at it.
Yeah, he's
and
a
he
business
taught
genius, eh?
Well, he
What's
taught.
this? What, like, how does he do it? Like,
Well, he learned on selling comic books, and then he had a
Wow.
bookstore, and then he came to Vancouver and he sold the shit out of hemp seeds and hemp products and bongs, pipes, and rolling papers, and
then he used that
pot
to
seeds.
finance activism.
Yeah, and he financed all kinds of stuff with the seed money. He financed the magazine. He financed Pot TV. He financed Cannabis Culture Online. He financed 1,000 court cases. He financed my court case at the Supreme Court of Canada. He financed all kinds of lobbying like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, it is really incredible, and now kind of like he doesn't have the best reputation anymore. And I
Well-
have to remind people, it's like, you know, his reputation as a movement hero is well deserved.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a mixed blessing. He's a mixed blessing. He for a while there, he was on the good guy's side, and then he got seduced by the dark side of the force.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the drug war kind of broke him. I mean, he did
Well,
4 years plus
Yeah, and then
in
when he
jail
came-
in the U.S.
And then I met him after he got out.
And then he
of
got out.
prison, and
he
yeah.
opened up a bunch of cannabis cafe pot dispensaries, and they shut them all down, and they raided him out of existence.
Uh-huh.
And so then he joined up with People's Party of Canada and the far right extremists, and
yeah.
and
Now seems to be
Now-
an anti-trans activist.
oh man, it's so depressing because
Yeah.
at one time he was a hero, and now he's like joined the Sith, man.
Uh-huh. Okay, but so back then, so he was instrumental in all of the cannabis culture, pot block type stuff.
Yeah,
you want
well,
to
he
talk about
taught-
the pot block?
Emery taught Dana Larson how to be a businessman. And Dana Larson's now owner of the Coca Leaf Cafe.
So is
He's
he-
got the Get Your Drugs Tested. He's got the medical cannabis dispensary. He taught.
He's the torchbearer now.
He's out in front doing the drug peace activism that nobody else on earth is doing. He taught Hillary Black how to be an entrepreneur, and
I don't even know who that is.
She opened up the first medical pot dispensary in Canada,
Uh-huh.
the Compassion Club. And in fact, before that, it was a medicinal cannabis cooperative.
Yeah.
And so she was in 95, she was doing MedPot. Nobody else in Canada was doing MedPot in 95.
Mhm.
She was an entrepreneur, and then in 97 she came out on CBC.
Right,
She
okay,
was
yeah,
the
so-
face of MedPot activism in
Okay,
Canada.
so I'll just break it down
Yeah.
for the viewers, because we got viewers in the U.S. and or we at least one.
Yeah. Yeah, so Dana Larson, me, Hillary Black, we were all employees of Mark Emery.
No,
and
but
we-
I want to talk about Section 56 and basically
Okay.
how MedPot became legal. So yeah, tell us about what Section 56 is, first of all.
Well, the exemption isn't as important as what Hillary was doing. Can I deviate back to that for a second?
Sure.
So Hillary Black and a bunch of women basically opened up a dispensary in Vancouver called the Compassion Club, and what she did was she made it unraidable because she knew her shit. She was out in the media, on television, making the case for medical cannabis, and the optics were such that if they raided her place, it would be 98 to 99% of the public against what the police did
Hmm.
and for medical marijuana, and they didn't want to make a martyr out of her, so she got away with it. So she
This
expanded.
is also during the Chrétien years, I think, when they wanted to legalize weed.
No,
back then,
no, they didn't want to legalize it. Chrétien said he was in favor of decrim. He said, I'd have the joint in one hand and the money for the fine in the other. Which would also have been worse than no change at all, because I did a an analysis of decrim, of all the examples of decrim thus
Can
far.
we just do the rest of the interview in your impression?
No, I fucking hate that guy. But anyway, decrim could mean net widening, which is arresting more people. And more people could go to jail for unpaid fines. So decrim could be worse than nothing at all. In fact, in Singapore, it's decrim, and under 500 grams, and you get 2 years of group therapy and re-education.
Okay,
and over
so-
500 grams, you get the death penalty. So that's decrim in Singapore. But you're not a criminal. You just have behavioral problems.
But I'm pretty sure that this is kind of part of the reason that people don't understand the story of legalization or how prohibition was broken is because all of the people who know the story are so scatterbrained that when you start talking to them, they go all over the place, and the story doesn't make any sense.
Well, you don't want to leave decrim in people's minds as a good thing, because it just means no criminal penalties. It doesn't mean no penalties at all.
Okay.
And what they do is they replace criminal penalties with even worse penalties that aren't criminal.
But I want to talk about Section 56, so let me for a second.
Okay.
So Section 56 is the section of the criminal code that allows for exemptions to prohibition. So an example would be, if an illegal drug is being studied by researchers, then they can apply for an exemption under Section 56.
Yeah.
And how prohibition was broken is that they acknowledged that it was medicine in the case of one particular person.
Terry Parker?
Yeah, and they gave him an exemption. What condition did he have?
Terry Parker had epilepsy.
So he had epilepsy, so he needed weed for his epilepsy. So what happened when they acknowledged that it was a medicine was, for some people at least, then it opened the doors to people applying for Section 56 exemptions, and then and then doctors started writing prescriptions, and then they needed to create an infrastructure for assessing these, and then people used lawyers to challenge it, and then there was acts of civil disobedience as well, strategically designed to open up the loopholes more and more, and then it became a question of a constitutional question, because people have the right under the Constitution to what is it? It's not
Medical
medicine.
necessity.
Medical necessity.
That was where we won
Interpretation.
in the courts. Where we lost was liberty and security of the person, and Section 7 and 15 arguments that I took to the Supreme Court of Canada with two other appellants, and we lost that in 2003. But where we really won wasn't the medical argument, and it wasn't the recreational argument. It was the farmers markets at the demonstrations that we held in Vancouver. We protected dealers through a nonviolent arrest resistance tactic called hug power. And what would happen is pot dealers would come out with their pot on their tables, and they'd have jars and a scale, and they would sell pot. And if the cops came and hassled anybody, we'd go up to the person getting arrested and we give them a hug, and then we didn't let go. And then the cops had a dilemma. They were like, oh, what are we going to do? Are we going to beat these people up in front of all these witnesses, and everybody's got a phone camera, and are we going to take them to court and say peaceful assembly doesn't apply to people if they're protesting pot illegally? Or are we going to let them get away with it?
Yeah.
So 99 times out of 100, they let us get away with it, and the farmers markets grew and grew and grew. And by 2019, Cypress Hill was playing at our farmers market, and there was 150,000 people there.
That's
so
epic.
There were thousands of people by.
So there were a few different kind of weapons in the arsenal.
Yeah.
There was lawyers, which used to great effect. There was, the
compassion clubs.
Yeah.
There was seed sales. There was farmers markets.
Mm-hmm.
There was.
And then there's business people who are, that's an important part of the story. Is cannabis broke because people were breaking the law, and a lot of them were breaking the law to make money. So
yeah, sure. Bongs, pipes, rolling papers. There was hemp clothes. There was cannabis culture and other literature. There was grow guides. There was a ton of ways people could participate in this community, and we all more or less cooperated on things, and basically grew the community to where it became a voter bloc that the Liberal Party couldn't ignore. And in 2015, Trudeau ran on a legalization platform and had the biggest power sweep in Canadian political history
Mhm.
when he totally destroyed the Conservative government
Yep.
and had the greatest shift of power in Parliament ever.
Yeah. And then, kind of crazy that on the day itself of legalization, what was it, October 17th, 2017? Was that
2018?
2018? So on that day, there was no celebrations anywhere.
No.
Nobody
Because-
was happy about it.
Yeah, because the people who were anti-pot thought that it was the end of the world, and the pro-pot people were like, fuck this cartel.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, a lot of us, felt like the corporations were just moving in to fucking, steal our livelihoods.
And they did.
Yeah.
For a large segment of the population, they did.
Yeah, because part of the story of weed in Canada is that, draft dodgers had a lot to do with it, There's people who, were being forced by the U.S. government to go to Vietnam to murder people for God knows what fucking stupid reason.
Oh,
and they said
can I tell you
no,
the reason?
and sure.
Okay, so the Vietnam War was another drug war. There's this thing called the Golden Triangle, where much of the opium of the world is grown,
Okay.
and the CIA took over the control of the opium growing from the French intelligence people, and but the French used to be in Vietnam.
Okay, this is fascinating to me because I am 34 years old. My father was a journalist. I've been interested in, radical politics my entire life.
Yeah.
And I have never heard a decent explanation for why the U.S. invaded
I've got
Vietnam.
one that's illustrated by my friend Bob High, and it is amazing.
Okay, but this is the thing. We got to stay sort of on topic, though.
Well,
We're
you
trying-
brought up Vietnam, and you said, why is it happening? Here, let me tell you. Vietnam, a war profiteers. It's all in Amsterdam comics, and Bush became head of the control over illegal drug smuggling, and the Golden Triangle, and then there's something called the French Connection, where he moved all the opium into Marseille, or the heroin. Some of it was converted into heroin, and they converted the rest into heroin then, and then it would go for a while into Havana, Cuba, where then it would be smuggled up into Florida. But then this guy named Fidel Castro, he fucked that up, and then then there's a whole other story about.
According to the anti-Castro Cubans in Miami, Fidel and them were involved in drug running. How do you feel about that?
Well, not to the extent of the CIA or the mafia, because Fidel Castro is involved in whatever he was involved in. It was in Cuba, and the mafia and the CIA, they operated globally, right?
Yeah,
so if you're going to be a drug smuggler, you don't just stick to one country. You do it in all countries, and that's what the CIA and the mafia are involved in to this day.
Yeah.
So what happened was Cuba used to be the mafia's playground. It was a Disneyland.
Of course, I've been there. I was there in January, and my mind was absolutely blown. Like, if the streets were paved in gold, I wouldn't be that much more impressed.
So up until '59, it was the mafia's property. And then Castro kicked the mafia out of Cuba.
Yeah.
And so the CIA then raised an army to invade Cuba. And Kennedy wouldn't give them air support. So then they focused on shooting Kennedy. And this is the same group of Miami Cubans that were behind the assassination of the Kennedys, of Marilyn Monroe, because she knew too much.
So do you think that they're in Venezuela now? Because
maybe. I mean,
that's what I heard is that Maduro is just a puppet, and that
they're in everywhere. If you read this book called "The CIA is Organized Crime" by Douglas Valentine, he explains he got the keys to the kingdom. He got to interview all the insiders about it, and he wrote the most tell-all story of how the CIA is involved in organized crime of anybody in the world. And I've read a bunch of CIA history.
Okay, so part of what I'm interested in as well in reporting on the drug war is where did the heroin go? And
got replaced by oxycodone and then fentanyl and then carfentanil because they're cheaper to produce and it's easier to smuggle because it's more concentrated.
Okay, so but I mean, what I heard is that the heroin was coming in on military planes from Afghanistan. So I was wondering if maybe when Canada withdrew from the war in Afghanistan, whether the heroin supply dried up for that reason?
Well, yeah, but it couldn't dry up because there was still the demand. So they had to replace it with cheaper, more synthetic substitutes that were easier to smuggle.
Okay, so you accept that explanation is that users prefer fentanyl because it's stronger and cheaper, and that's
Not
the reason that
necessarily.
heroin is gone? Or?
Not necessarily. I mean, what it is people will use the opiate that's available to them, and if the supplier replaces one with the other, then people will go to their zero choice option.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, I've been living in Mexico, and there's no fentanyl there. And I was in Australia a few years ago, and there seems to be no opiates there. It's all meth. I don't know if that's changed now. So then, why are Canada and the U.S. so affected by this opiate crisis? And I have to think about, global geopolitics, and then ask myself, okay, well, who are the two most likely candidates, who are spreading these drugs if we're if we consider that intelligence agencies are, the biggest drug dealers there are. So maybe it's the Canadian government. They want to eliminate,
It's the U.S. intelligence agencies and the mafia, who operated originally out of Sicily, but have got little Italy in every corner of the world.
Couldn't it also be the CCP and getting revenge for the opium wars and the century of humiliation? Wouldn't that make logical sense too?
Well,
or Russia, trying to weaken Canada because they want the Northwest Passage.
Yeah, I've seen some evidence that carfentanil are synthesized in China and come out of Asia.
Yeah.
But the guys making the most money off it aren't the guys producing it. It's the guys moving it through borders. Like, you put your price on it, because if the supplier and the street retailers, the supplier can't make any money unless somebody moves it, and the street dealers can't make any money unless someone supplies it, and the guys who can get it across borders make the most money, because that's the hardest job of all. And if you can consistently get it across the border, you make the most money. And
what's the best way to consistently get it across the border is to be the fucking government.
Be the fucking military, because they're like, oh no, you're not cleared to open that.
Yep. Yeah, and this is, so
the CIA
diplomats,
run the fucking military.
Diplomats are able to bring in a certain amount in a box that's not, this is Canadian law. Under Canadian law, they all get a box, and you could fit a fuck ton of fentanyl in one of those boxes.
No. Think bigger than that. The guy who you gotta research is a guy named Barry Seal. They've done some movies about him in the 80s, but he was with the fucking CIA since the 50s, since he was in his teens. He was in the same Louisiana cadet group as Lee Harvey Oswald. Am I starting to make sense to you now? He brought in cocaine in cargo jets, not briefcases. Let me tell you, in C-130 cargo jets.
You wouldn't need a very, one thing that fentanyl has done is that, prohibition is officially unenforceable. And I mean, it was always arguably unenforceable, because once, if, supply and demand being what it is that, the more barriers there are to something, the higher the price, and therefore the higher the potential profit. And so you're always going to have, if the market exists for something, then somebody's going to figure out how to fill that demand. But I think that fentanyl really means that it's officially absolutely unenforceable. You get a couple of people that have that diplomatic privilege to cross borders, with briefcases which can't be searched by law, and they just make enough trips back and forth, and just that could supply the the demand of the.
It's quite concentrated.
Yeah.
Well, you make a strong case for that. That might be true. Cocaine, though, is not as concentrated as fentanyl or carfentanil. But look at what are their names? That's a good thing I wrote it down in a comic book.
And by the way, while he's looking that up, if anybody out there watching this wants to turn Vansterdam Comics into an animated docu-series and make $1 million, or I mean, probably a lot more than $1 million. What do you think that probably you would make if you turned this into a movie?
The first question is, how many people on Netflix and other streaming services are smoking pot or doing other drugs and looking for something cool to watch? Probably a lot. That's a big market.
Yeah.
Now, if you had a Netflix series that was in underground cartoon style and full color and had explosive animation of a very imaginative sense and promised to reveal all the secrets of the drug war, that would probably be a pretty big market.
Some of the drugs.
So this is about what's happening today, and it goes into KBR and Brown and Root and guys like BCCI and DynCorp.
Where can people get your book?
Okay. So there's a few copies left available at the Coca Leaf Cafe.
You said it was just the last one. Are you just trying to?
Well, no. I had 6 copies. I had 6. Let me finish. I had 6 copies that I brought in. I'm going to bring in 6 more, and then that's it for the ones at the Coca Leaf Cafe. Weeds, which is
incredibly scarce and rare, basically. Yeah. You're lucky if you can get your hands on it.
Weeds is the publisher. They'll still have a few copies left. And if you're serious, you can contact me at malmalevine@gmail.com. And you have connections to Animation Studio, I will supply you with a copy.
Okay, so I want to move to a different subject which interests me, is that unlike most of the OG cannabis activists, you identify as an anarchist. Well,
there are others too.
Well, yeah, but I mean the most famous ones, Dana Larson, Mark Emery, they're not anarchists. They are democratic socialists, or
Emery is a fucking far right fascist right now. Dana Larson's like a NDP socialist. Dana Beal's an anarchist. He's part of the Yippies, and he's in the U.S. still arguably doing frontline activist stuff. I know a few other hardcore anarchist drug peace activists, so I'm not the only one.
Okay. And yeah, because I don't know, like I think that they talk about regulation and kind of like people were making the argument for let's legalize so that we can tax things and then use them to pay for social programs and stuff like that. And I think that we've seen in recent years that entrusting the government to kind of look out for the best interests of the people is naive.
Well, I'm not against social programs, but what I am against is representative democracy. I think a better way to decide how to spend tax money is by getting together as equals and having referendums. And have you ever been to Christiania?
I have not.
Okay, Christiania is the biggest anarchist squat in the world. It's an anarchist squat in Denmark in the middle of Copenhagen. 2,000 people, 4,000 dogs, no rulers, just meetings of equals, and then deciding together as a group by consensus.
I kind of heard that it got taken over by gangs.
I wouldn't say taken over. I'd say gangs are a problem, but it's still anarchist at heart.
Okay.
And it still shows an example of how decisions can be made without abdicating responsibility onto a few elites.
Okay, so you seem to me like really somebody who has a tremendous sense of purpose in your life. What's your mission in life?
Well, I'd like to make the world, sustainable, make it a nicer place than when I arrived and have fun doing it. But more specifically, I would like to have drug peace in all countries where there would be no more drug crimes. Hard drugs would be distributed by pharmacists and herbal medicines by everybody, grown and produced and distributed in farmers markets and in cafes and stuff like that.
Do you believe in God?
No, I'm kind of I believe in, if you want to call God the ability to reason and share reason between people, then sure, I believe in God. But that's when I'm feeling generous and I'm around theists that I like. When I'm around theists that I don't like, I'm a militant atheist, and I think
I love the honesty.
Do
you believe in COVID?
I wrote 3 articles on COVID-19. I call them COVID-19, Cannabis and Herbal Medicine, part 1, 2, 3. I believe people should not be afraid to look into gain-of-function research into coronaviruses, and look at what Ralph Baric was doing for the last 20 years, and not be scared to research Fort Detrick, Maryland.
Okay.
And so I've gathered a lot of that evidence in my articles. So
Okay, so do you think,
definitely check that out.
do you got any conspiracy theories around AIDS? Do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, part 1 goes into that heavily into HIV and AIDS and Robert Gallo, and how in 1969 the U.S. Defense Department allocated millions of dollars, $10 million to create AIDS-like viruses.
Because the weird thing is that in all of my research around injection drug use over the last week or so, nobody has even brought up HIV or AIDS.
Well, okay, here's another thing. After the Kennedy assassination, the CIA used their connections in the media to introduce the concept of conspiracy theorist as a total negative thing.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Before Kennedy was assassinated,
Mockingbird, is it called?
yeah, before Kennedy was assassinated, you see the term conspiracy theorist 10 times a year.
Yeah.
And then after he was assassinated and people started asking questions and the Warren Commission came out, you'd see the term conspiracy theorist thousands of times a year.
Yeah, pejorative for critical thinkers, basically.
Yeah. And it basically, what it does, like Chomsky points out, it prevents people from institutional analysis. Like he says, Chomsky says, when I point out that General Motors wants to maximize market share, it's not a conspiracy theory. That's institutional analysis.
Yeah.
But the term conspiracy theorist prevents people from even questioning their superiors, even looking into elite deviants, looking into conflicts of interest, and then you get a very naive view of the world. And I'm not a coincidence theorist.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not afraid of being called a conspiracy theorist, because it's much, in my view, it's much worse to be a coincidence theorist and to assume the best of these grease balls that rule.
That'd be crazy. Yeah. Who's gonna win World War III?
Well, I'm always fighting for the Ewoks, man.
Yeah, me too. No, I'm serious, man. I mean, well, I think that Ewoks are actually, I don't think that they could do this now, or if people realize that the Ewoks are kind of a caricature of Mayans, and you realize that that scene in Star Wars was shot at Tikal, I think that the Ewoks are Maya, man.
Well,
I
got a different
politically
view.
Correct.
I got a different view. So, George Lucas was cornered at one point in time, or put on the phone in front of a bunch of executives, and was asked straight out, the spice that Han Solo smuggles, is it drugs? And the executives were like, of course it's not drugs, it's just spice, it's not drugs. And Lucas was like, what are you talking about? Of course it's drugs. Yeah, Han Solo's a drug smuggler.
Yeah, no shit.
So the rebels, the Rebel Alliance, is
a bunch of drug dealers.
Well, it's everybody but the establishment, and the Sith and the evil empire is the establishment, and that's the analogy. So I'm thinking the Ewoks are just the fucking hippies with low tech, but they got home ice advantage, man. They got the home turf. And these stormtroopers who come into your neighborhoods and try to fuck shit up, they don't know all the sneaky back passageways. They don't have the modern day, I would say, the weapons of today aren't lightsabers, they're phone cameras. The weapons of today are non-violent arrest resistance tactics. The weapons of today are projection TV screens onto walls, or artwork, or the Goddess of Democracy in Tiananmen Square, or ways of conveying the truth to everybody at once. Those are the weapons of today, and we're the Ewoks, and we've got these weapons, and the stormtroopers can't compete.
All right, so we're gonna win.
No, but we're not guaranteed to lose either. It's whichever people are familiar with the truth, feel that they have the truth on their side, can debunk the other side better, and keep on a-coming. Like Abby Hoffman said, the little guy will whip the big guy every time so long as he's in the right, and he keeps on a-coming.